Friends or Lovers is a pretty great Wings episode, and not just because we get a mention of Lord Byron. This is the ninth episode of the second season, and there will be spoilers as I discuss what happens in this. And it starts off not connected to the main narrative, where Roy asks Lowell to take one of his passengers' bags to the plane. He says, "Can you take Mr. Mortenson's bag?" And Lowell comes along and says to his wife, "Right this way, ma'am." I kind of wonder if that joke would be put into a sitcom today. I don't think it's offensive as such. I don't think it's problematic. I just wonder if it's one of those where it's maybe slightly bordering on offensive. But personally, as a female, I don't find it offensive, but I thought it was definitely very Lowell. And then we get one of the two main narratives established, and this is the fact that following on from the previous episode, Joe is still trying to find a backup pilot because he is still temporarily unable to fly because of hypertension, and he ends up hiring an 18-year-old called Kenny. Played by Michael Manasseri. He is definitely a breath of fresh air. I really enjoyed the character, and I don't have too much to say about him, to be honest. He pops up every now and then, and I thought he was a pretty decent character. The rest of the episode focuses on Joe and Helen, both of whom are complaining about their current lives. Helen for the lack of romance in her life, Joe because he realises that all he has is his plane, is his business, and he feels like he needs something else, which I think is a really healthy, positive way of looking at it. Because he's been forced to no longer fly at the moment, he realises there's this gap in his life, and he ultimately approaches Helen and says, "Let's go on a date." Initially, Helen says no, it's too convenient, but then she decides to go on this date. And also, Helen's outfit in this episode is so beautiful because she went to a wedding, she's wearing a bridesmaid dress, her normal clothes are locked in her car, so she has to wear this dress for a little bit of the episode. Absolutely love it. It's such a small detail. I'm not saying the episode would have been less good if that wasn't the case, but it certainly added something a little bit fascinating. They decide to keep this date a secret from Brian, at least for now, but we, the viewer, can see that because of a problem with the radio, the communication between the ground and the plane, Brian actually hears them discussing it. And we see Brian and Kenny in the plane overhearing this conversation. And we definitely have an element of mystery there because Brian is obviously going to do something with this information, but what is he going to do? And I like that. I like that the element of surprise there was carried throughout pretty much the second half of the episode. Initially, he starts off trying to wind up Joe. He approaches Joe as Joe's getting ready for his date. I thought that was very well written. It didn't go in the direction I thought, and I think they maybe could have done a little bit more with that. Brian could have had a little bit more fun winding Joe up. What we got was good. I feel like it could have been a bit better, but nevertheless, it wasn't too bad. And then we cut to Helen and Joe after the date, and I think it was a sensible decision to not show us the date itself because the date wouldn't have been that awkward at that point if they're just having dinner, they're just talking as if they're friends. I don't think that would have been that awkward, but having them drive up to this place called Indian Point, I think that was a really good place to pick things up because things get a little bit awkward. They try to kiss. It doesn't go according to plan. They both keep laughing. I like the fact they both were laughing at the situation. Had it just been one of them, it might have felt imbalanced, like they were both having a different experience or coming at this from different perspectives. But the fact that they both had a very similar response, I thought, was a really good way to take things. And then we get the quote from Helen when after Joe says, "Let it rip," Helen says, and I quote, "I don't think that's quite the way Byron would have put it," and me being deeply in love with Byron, it just put a little smile on my face. And then we get this really beautiful kiss, and it's really well done, and it's really lovely to see, and it's nice to see Joe and Helen together, and then they kind of decide they'll just go home for the evening, and up pops Brian, who has been in the back seat of the car this entire time. And it's certainly good fun. I rather enjoyed it. I thought it was a very entertaining episode. I think the way they treated Helen and Joe as characters was really effective. As I said, if one of them had been maybe more awkward than the other, or one wasn't taking it as seriously as the other, it might not have worked as well. But because they seemed to be working in harmony, it meant it was a really pleasant experience, and I rather enjoyed it. Definitely a quality episode. The mention of Byron was just the cherry on the icing on the cake, and ultimately, Friends or Lovers was a pretty enjoyable episode.